You might know there are a couple of key areas in any presentation that most people in the audience will retain and recall and remember. But you might not know what they are. So most of us are aware of certain things happening in presentations, and we think of presentations we've seen, good, bad, or indifference. And there are certain bits and pieces we can recall. But actually, if you start to think back of all of the presentations, the meetings, the briefings, the conference speeches you've seen, there are typically two areas that stick in people's brains. One is the start, and the other is the end. Now, in a previous video, I've shared with you 5 mistakes that people often make in the first 5 minutes of a presentation. In this video, we're going to talk about the same window, but at the end of the session. So what is it that happens in that last 5-10 minutes, half an hour if it's a really bad one, that will often undo any of the work you've done in the previous presentation, whether it was a great presentation, an average presentation, a middling presentation, or whatever else. And these are things that people really don't often think about. So I'm going to share these with you. I'm going to walk you through these 5 mistakes that people often make, and I'm going to give you then some suggestions for what you might want to consider doing instead. My name's Graham. I am from Blue Beetle People Solutions, and for nearly 3 decades now, I've been working with organizations right across Europe, the US, all throughout the UK, in the Far East, in countries in Africa, and we work on anything that helps managers and leaders deliver their presentations better, that helps managers and leaders have difficult conversations, that helps managers and leaders lead. So it's a whole range of areas that we work in. And in today's session, it's all about presentations. So let's get straight into this and let's figure out some of the key mistakes that people often make. By the way, if you still do these, and statistically you probably do at least one, the world will keep turning. Nothing tremendously bad will happen. But listen, if you've gone to all the effort and hassle of standing up, saying a few words, switching on the camera, going live, then surely you want the best possible impact you can. And if you have delivered, whether it's a work event or a conference or just a team briefing, you really want the audience to act on what you've been discussing, right? Otherwise, what was the point? So if we can look at these and start to see these as small but important changes, they are well worth considering. So these are our 5 key areas that I'm suggesting to start with. You really want to be very careful about. I'm going to walk you through these 5. I'm going to tell you why they are so bad for your presentation, and then I'll give you some alternatives. And I'm also today going to give you a 3-point pro close. So the 3-point pro close is so simple that you may even go, nothing. But it's a 3-point close that I pretty much always use on any event that I speak at. So here are the 5 things. First of all, in summary. Now, you will have heard this. You may have said this many times yourself. There comes that point. You've got one eye on the clock. Your audience are getting a bit fidgety. You know you've got 3 more slides to go. And you say, well, in summary, in conclusion, summing it all up, bringing this all to a close. And it seems like it's a sensible thing to do. It lets people know that things are coming to a close. But I want you to understand something. You, me, most of us believe we retain and recall far more information than we actually do. Most of us are pretty bad at remembering stuff. I absolutely include myself in that. By the way, I'm a very enthusiastic learner. I pay for my own personal development. And yet I know that whilst I'm listening to something that I'm enjoying, that I'm participating in, I know that my memory of it is going to be sorely tested. And so there's a thing that happens when you say in summary, or a version of that. Your audience starts mentally checking out. Some of them, by the way, physically start checking out, put their coats on and stuff and stuffing things in their bags. Think back to when you're at school. And you knew, if you could see another class was starting to put their stuff away, you knew end of the day was coming. And you might have started putting things in your pencil case, started putting stuff in your desk, if you had a desk, putting things in your bags. And the more ambitious of us would start sliding into our coats. And the problem is, that's what your audience is doing when you start to say in conclusion, in summary, to round it all up. They're actually not listening. And this is not a good place to be, is it? Because if we are into the work of Tony Buzan, of course, credited with being the creator of the mind map, written over 100 books all about memory and retention and mind and learning, has commented that the start and the end of the presentation, at best, those of us who are most engaged will retain and recall 80% of what happens and what is said. The moment we say, in summary, in conclusion, bring it to a close, we start to get that winds down from our audience. So it's a really dangerous phrase to be thinking about. I'll give you a better alternative in just a moment. Number 2 is contentious. Don't do questions. Now, we've all seen it. You may have done it. You've got to the end of your presentation. It didn't go too badly. You're a bit nervous earlier on. You had the dry mouth, but you remembered to take the water on stage. And then you go, well, that's all from me. You click your slide and your slide says, any questions? And it's got that stick figure going like this. Please don't use that slide anymore. Right, any questions? Now, you know what happens? Any questions? The room is silent. There's a tumbleweed drifting in the background. A church bell rings in the distance. Nobody says nothing. And then what happens is somebody friendly to you sticks their hands up and asks a question. You may have even pre-prepared that question. In fact, you may have had the idea, I know what I'll do, just to get the ball rolling when we get to questions. Would you mind asking me a question? Now, if you do that, everybody in the room knows that it's a pre-planned question. So that's a terrible idea. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is not to do questions at the end. Sometimes you have no choice, and I will talk about that in just a moment. But in most cases, if you're running this event or this bit of the event, if this is your conference section, if it is your team or your briefing, if it is a work thing where you have to stand up and say a few words, you get the option of whether or not to say any questions at the end. Now, it sounds and feels logical that you ought to be saying any questions. It sounds and feels logical that at that point your audience starts going, oh yes, da 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 da. But the problem is this. You can never legislate for how long the end is now going to last. Because if I say any questions and it was a really contentious piece of work, suddenly I'm faced with potentially an angry mob who now will want to ask loads of questions. And that means we could overrun. And you can see from point 4, we shouldn't overrun. Or we end up with a really awful, uncomfortable feeling at the end because somebody wants their voice to be heard or something has to be said. Or we end up on stage going, well, I'll get back to you about that. I'll let you know about that. And it all becomes very, very messy. Questions at the end, we lose control of where it's going. The opposite of all of that is any questions. You put 15 minutes in the diary and nobody's got a word. Nobody has anything to say. So even if your presentation was fine, you got through it and you felt comfortable and it was well received, everybody remembers any questions? Silence. Somebody coughing at the back of the room. And you then end up feeling compelled to fill the silence. No questions? Nothing? Nervous laugh. I must have done a really good job then. I'll take that as no questions then. It's just messy and clunky and it doesn't help you. So don't say in summary, don't do questions. Let's look at number 3. Don't be apologetic. This is one of the easiest traps to fall into. You get to the end of your presentation and you say, well, sorry, I have a sore throat. Say, sorry, that's the end of my presentation today. I'm sorry that. And then you start apologizing for something that you noticed. I'm sorry I lost my way a bit earlier on. I'm sorry the slides were a bit dry. I'm sorry we've overrun. I'm sorry that it wasn't quite as interesting as... Now, the problem with this, and as soon as I say it out loud, you can see it's a problem, right? The problem with all of this is you're apologizing for work that's already been done. And I understand why you do it. You do it because it's you on stage or you on camera. It feels very exposed. It feels very human. It's me here. And if I've just not made this go as well as I like, I somehow feel that if I apologize now, it will make it better. It doesn't. It never does. One of the worst things you can do is apologize because at this stage, actually, I suddenly notice that you've done that. I noticed that we overrun and now I check out. Or I noticed that you were quite nervous, or I noticed that the other guy was a better speaker. In other words, you're apologizing for something that we've done. We're through that now. We're on to the next stage. There's a rare exception to this, and I might apologise if the venue was particularly loud or if lunch was late. I might apologise for those things. But as regards your bit of work, don't be apologetic. Let's look at number 4. How many presentations have you been to? How many presentations have you given that have overrun? Now, there's always an exception, but the exception should be rare. It should be an exception. It shouldn't be the norm. Think about all the presentations you've gone to that have clicked past the advertised finish time. What happens when you click past the advertised session time when you are listening to somebody else? You mentally check out. You start wondering how much longer this is going to be. Your bladder reminds you half an hour ago you needed to go to the toilet, but you thought half an hour, that's fine. But now you're thinking, is it going to be half an hour? Is it going to be 45 minutes? Is it going to be another hour? Do I need to leave now? If you overrun, you show massive disrespect for your audience. If you overrun, you run the risk of people leaving because they've got plans. They've got their lives they need to deal with as well. If you overrun, you make it harder for people to come to your session next time because they know that you're somebody who regularly overruns. Now, I know right now you're thinking, yeah, but sometimes it's out of your control. Sometimes a speaker turns up late. Sometimes lunch is served late. Sometimes the audience really gets into something, so you have to deal with it. All of that, absolutely true. And I'll share some responses for that with you in just a moment when we flip over the slide. And number 5, don't forget to turn off. It is the easiest thing in the world to finish your presentation, to feel a sense of relief and go, oh, oh goodness, oh, that was tough, blimey, they didn't like that. And remember that your microphone's still on. This has happened to John Major and Gordon Brown and many other people. It's the easiest thing in the world to come to the end of the Zoom or the Teams call and click end and go, oh, goodness, they were hard. And then notice that you have to press close twice and you're still broadcasting. More common, it's very, very easy. When you finish your presentation, cheers, David, when you finish your presentation, to get off stage, and although you are like this on stage, to get to wherever your colleagues are talking and then go, we can still see you. So you've got to remember at the end of your presentation, you've got to turn off. Now, that either means turn off if it's digital like this, or it means making an end to that bit and then moving into the next bit. I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So these are the 5 common mistakes. Statistically, every speaker I've seen or heard or watched, and I see a lot, will often make 1 or 2 of these. It's likely you might do 1 or 2 of these. Don't say in summary. Don't do questions at the end. Don't be apologetic. Don't overrun. And don't forget that turn off. All right, so I've been saying don't a lot. What should we be doing instead? By the way, just to let you know, we are about halfway through the session. We're going to be winding up by 1:45. So whatever time zone you might be watching this in, we are about halfway through. So let's just get on to these last couple of ideas. This is what I'd like you to start doing instead. Number 1 then, notify the close time. Now there's a difference between saying in summary, in conclusion, we know, right? Let's assume you are due to finish at 4:30, wherever you happen to be. Now, rather than saying in summary, in conclusion, instead, say as people come back, or as you finish one exercise, or as a speaker finishes, or as you get some feedback from the audience, whatever's going on, this is a really good thing to do that notifies people about close time, but actually gets a spike of energy rather than the opposite. So I would typically say something like, right, you can see it's 4:15. This session is going to close at 4:30 as previously advertised. There are a couple more things we need to do before then. And what I will often do is say to people, the device you've got with you, we've all got the same time on them, right? And this is the thing that people often don't notice. All of our devices show exactly the same time. So if I'm getting feedback from a room full of people, one of the things I'll do is say, check the time on your device now. You can see how long we've all got. And if I want input from everybody, if I want a few questions or comments, I will ask them to all refer to that same thing, because we can all see as 4:30 gets closer and closer. What we don't want is Chatty Bob. And we've all got a Chatty Bob in our organization who gets to their bit and then just goes off on one. The engagement's lovely, but people are starting to get a bit irritated because they know everybody has to be heard from. So this is what I'll often do. This is the close time. Check your devices. This is what I want us to do between now and then. And if it's appropriate, I'll say, listen, if you are feeling a bit tired, if you're feeling a bit like it's been working hard today, really appreciate it. Let's just put 15 more minutes in and then we'll be done. So I often do that. Questions. I said no questions at the end. The obvious and easy and considerably better and more useful solution to that is questions throughout. This does come with a caveat. First of all, it may not be possible to have questions throughout, and it may be that the organizer or whoever is in charge says, no, we're doing questions at the end. It may be the event you're running isn't appropriate for questions throughout. I did a thing in online recently, maybe 2 weeks ago, and we had about 300 people digital in the room across several time zones, and that was me speaking for 20 minutes, and then they specifically wanted questions at the end. That's fine. But by and large, you're much better to ask your audience questions. By and large, you're much better to allow people to ask questions. You see, what happens is if you ask questions, your audience will start to ask questions back. If you give your audience time to talk to each other, again, not appropriate in all sessions, but if you give your audience time to talk with each other, they'll often feel prompted either to ask each other questions or you. The big problem with can we leave all questions to the end is, first of all, as I said, you've got no control over the time or the end of the presentation, how it's going to feel. But also, it's really easy to forget the thing you wanted to say. It felt relevant now, but an hour later, I've forgotten all about it. Personal improvements. Instead of apologizing for what you just did, if you noticed that your slides were a bit dry, that your slides couldn't be read after the third row and there's 20 rows, if you noticed that you overran, if you noticed that you were an absolute bag of nerves throughout, do something about it. Now, this is never about complacency. It's never about overconfidence and arrogance. It is absolutely about developing and improving. When you are presenting, whether you're on camera or face to face, you are the product, you're the output. Most of us would never dream of submitting a report, making a thing, if you make things where you work. Most of us would never consider putting together a slide deck or or summarizing some work, some output, and then handing it over and saying it's not very good for these reasons. Most of us would never do that. But in presentations, it feels different. It feels different because it feels personal. It's you. I need you today to understand that when you're presenting, you are a product, you're a thing. Even if we know you, even if we work together all the time, when you're on stage, when you're on camera, we're seeing you as a product. So for this reason, when you're presenting on camera, as I am right now, you've got to get used to what you look and sound like. When you're presenting on stage, you've got to understand how you move, your weird little gestures, your little phrases that you overuse. You've got to understand these, because the more you do, the more powerful you can become as a presenter. I need you to understand that this is just a set of skills, like anything else you have to do at work. And if you have to present once per year, probably not a massive issue, is it? But if you're presenting all the time, if you are regularly having to speak at conferences or events or to stakeholders, if you are with your teams, your meetings, your briefings, then you need to do this better. So quit apologizing and just start sorting out the background. We have 2 more points, then I'll give you the pro tip finish. Finish within a 5-minute window. One thing that astounds me, and this is specifically about L&D, learning and development people. Often, if they're externals, and you'll have heard this before, they will say in the morning, so we're due to finish at 4:30. We'll try and finish a bit earlier if we can. And come 3:15, they're winding up. That seems to be a massive disservice to the client who's paid for you till 4:30. I don't understand how trainers are comfortable doing that. There's a bit of where we're all in this together, we all get away a bit earlier, we're all happy. But to me, it's a really bad message to send out. It shows you've really over puffed the time you've got, because actually by 3:15 you're all done anyway. Of course, there's always exceptions. Maybe there was a 45-minute window for lunch, and actually they had a 15-minute window for lunch, and they were straight back into it. In which case, you might say, "Well, I'm going to take that time off the end of the day." But actually, what I'm looking to do is not just not overrun, but I also don't want to be too short of the time either. So if it's a 4:30 finish, I'm aiming for 4:25 to 4:30. That's my window, because what that says, what that does is right at the start of the session at 10 o'clock, bang, you started, you hit the breaks, you hit the lunch times, you didn't overrun. Why? Because you made adjustments and alterations throughout. If the opening speaker was supposed to do 2 minutes and they spoke for 10, it's on you to solve that. And your audience shouldn't be worried about that. They shouldn't be stressed about it. We've overrun here. If you're still using this phrase, we're going to try and catch back some time. That's all on you. Stop doing all of that. You make the changes and the tweaks and the alterations. You drop slides. You move speakers. You drop some of the stuff that you wanted to talk about. Our audience wants to finish on time. We're all the same on this in this regard. So my target is a 5-minute window, 5 minutes before the close time, not 5 minutes either side. Even 5 minutes after, you will start to see a massive, rapid drop in attendance and retention recall. People start to check out. Finally, smile and wave. Smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave. All right, so I said you've got to be careful when you close. What I want to do when I finish a presentation, whether it's on camera, whether it's face-to-face, and I'll share this 3-point close with you in a second, is to make it very, very clear that this is the finish, which means that even if we've delivered a session and it's been quite tough, whilst I'm packing up, whilst I'm exiting, whilst I'm making sure everything's finished, I'm wearing a professional smile. You can't finish like this and then go straight into that. You can't online go, "All right, thanks very much." And people do it accidentally all of the time. So you're almost on stage. When you finish at the conference and you come down the stairs and you go to the back where the bar is, or you go and sit down at your table, people can still see you. And some people are still looking at you. And if it was a bit of a rocky presentation, if there were some challenges, people are looking to see how you feel it went. So keep in mind that after the presentation, smile and wave. All right, final thing I want to share with you, and this will bring us to a nice close. If you do have questions, comments, observations, if you're watching this live, type them in right now. Otherwise, if you're watching on video, of course, you can't do that. But let me share with you these 3 things that I use to close pretty much every presentation I do. What I might call the 3-point pro finish. Now, I've just been saying to you, don't do a summary. But it is important that the key points, the action points, the calls to action cheers, David, need to be reminded to your audience. Most of us forget stuff. So how do we do this? Well, typically I'll aim for 3 key points. I might ask the audience to think about their 3 key points and be ready to share one of them. Now, if you did that, if you had 10 people in the room, and this is great in an L&D function or something vaguely informal internally, if 10 people each share 1 or 2 key points, you'll actually cover most of the content you covered. So you could do it that way. You could encourage people to work in small groups, share what they're going to do next. If it's an internal works meeting, we might say, right, there's a bunch of things we need to do. Who's going to take what? What are our next steps? So again, rather than you standing there saying in summary, drone, 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 everybody checking out because they think they've already heard this, you get your audience to tell you what they're going to do. Who's going to take that piece of work? Who's going to move that? Who's going to make that call? So now what you do is you end up with a summary and you end up with a call to action, but you're not doing it. You could even just put the 3 top points or the 5 top points on the screen and say, email me within 24 hours to tell me what you're going to do. Second, you must appreciate your audience. Even if you've had a room full of miserable what's-it sat there glaring at you, you're still going to go, thanks for your input and engagement. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for being here for a timely arrival. Thanks for working with me today. It's been a hard day. Whatever's relevant. Thanks for all your input for the last hour. Now, you're got to not be sarcastic. So you've got to do this as genuinely as you can, even if you're thinking, what a bunch this were. You've really got to deliver this as though you truly, genuinely mean it. And the reason is this. Some people in your room really did input. Some really did not. But what we're looking to do is to reward the behavior we want. And the more you do this, the more your audience gets to hear, keep engaging, keep inputting, keep doing work. So your audience hears that, and we start to model the kind of behavior we want in future. Finally, the last words out of your mouth, aim for them to be thank you. Now, on stage, if it's a decent sized event and a room full of people and a number of speakers, thank you will nearly always precipitate a round of applause. And that's not as banal as it sounds. You don't want to walk off in silence. What you want is, well, even if it's a polite ripple, yeah, but what you want is thank you. And that cues it. What that does, because we're all used to that as the end of the presentation, that tells us that's it. That allows you to walk off, maintaining your smile and wave face. We spoke about that earlier. It tells the person who's running AV to turn your microphone down and to turn the music up, or tells the next person to come on stage. Thank you also should be your personal cue, your exit cue. So when I do that, I know that's my time to find the end broadcast button, or to find the switch off button, or to stop record button, whatever it's going to be. So it's a reminder to me and my brain, that's it. So thank you, always my last couple of words. And that pretty much is everything that I wanted to share with you in this session. This is all about how to close your session, your outro, and 5 common mistakes and 5 things you ought to consider doing instead, along with this 3-point pro finish. If you have enjoyed this, please do let me know. I am building up slowly a number of videos on YouTube, and they are currently linked about presentations, but we're going to be looking at difficult conversations. We're going to be looking at leadership, coaching, mentoring, a whole range of skills. If you've enjoyed this, please do consider subscribing on YouTube and check out the other videos there. For now, thank you very much for your input and engagement. Thank you.